many of you will be very much aware what it is I have been at for the last 18 months. But for those of you who haven't been, just to briefly explain to you, I've been involved in some postgraduate work at the Centre for Excellence in Media Practice at Bournemouth University. I've been studying for an MA in Creative and Media Education. Now, what that MA is designed to do, it is specifically designed for teachers and lecturers who are involved, obviously, in creative and media education, but it's designed for us to look, to examine, and to think about improving our own practice. So therefore, what I do at Bournemouth is linked to what I do here at DKIT, and the work I do here at DKIT already has been affected by what I've been doing at Bournemouth. So that's what I've been at. So this presentation today, in a way, kind of brings these two together and allows me to present to you what it is I've been doing. And I look forward to talking to you about the staff members who are here and yourselves as we go on over the next week or two as to how you actually feel about what it is I'm saying here today. So, this being part of my final project, at the very, very start of it, I spoke with the head of film studies, Dr. Ruth Barton, and Barry Digham, who lectures in screenwriting at the National Film School. Now, what should I say to them? What do you teach? How academic is your course? How do you get in? What points do you need? What kind of stories are your students telling? What kind of films are they making? And why? And what do you think about that? And here's what we do. I then spoke to two people. Alan Fitzpatrick, I interviewed because, as we all know here, he's quite involved with Marina and the third year production, but I wanted to talk to him outside of the work he does here at DKIT and say, well, what do you think? What kind of people are applying for your funding awards? What's the process like? What kind of stories are they telling? What interests you? I then went on, I've been involved in the Fastnet Short Film Festival since its inception, both kind of in an advisory capacity, but also I judge the best script every year. So I talked to the artistic director, and we spoke a lot about short film, because they started a short film festival there. So what was it about that they liked? What kind of films were they getting? And what did she think the whole process was all about? I then, as luck would have it, bumped into two graduates, David Thorpe and Patrick O'Connor, who were at school. David, who's now pursuing a master's in screenwriting, and Patrick, who's working in the industry for a production company in Dublin. And I talked to them, well, you know, you've been through the course, what was it like? The rest of the people here were people that writers and directors who were involved in the industry that I was interested in talking to. We have somebody from Mexico, we have two people from Ireland. I have Mike Lee up there. I didn't really interview him, but I'll tell you about that later on. I do have some quotes from him though. Dan Colley is an actor I worked with on a practice element of this project. And if you remember, the third years who are now fourth years, last year as we were coming to the end of term, I gave you questionnaires about social media, and I worked with that as well. So that's where I ended up. At the very end of it, these were all the people I had spoken to. But this was the very first thing I did. I can't understand why people are frightened of new ideas. I'm frightened of the old ones. It's a quote from the composer John Cage. Now, why did I write that out and stick it up on my wall at home? I suppose I did because I wanted to be brave with this project. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to honestly engage with my own practice, with what I do in the classroom with you people, both in my tutorials and in my lectures, and see what changes could be made that would be of benefit to the students. And so in thinking about this, moving on from that, I came up with this. I suppose my starting point was two observations. Now, for the last few years here at DKIT, in the screenwriting course, certain issues have arisen out of, it seemed to me, what was a lack of confidence in the students regarding their creative writing. I began to believe that in the students' minds, there was some sort of inherent link between academic ability and writing screenplays successfully. Now, my other observation was that there seemed to be that connection with the stories that were told. A personal voice, that kind of distinctive narrative that for me, I believe is so personally empowering, but also vital in filmmaking. Now, it was as if they weren't associating what they're doing in other areas on the course and what they do in my class. Now, that's the other more practical areas and what I'm doing in my class, which is screenwriting. So I asked myself, if I am to improve their confidence, will they have a better connection with what it is they write? And was another approach needed? And I asked myself, well, was that a more pluralistic one? Because I believe that if the students here can be encouraged to tell more interesting stories and are confident in doing so, they will become better filmmakers and they will move forward personally to grow stronger and more confident human beings and be able to claim their places in the world as they so rightfully should. So, in looking closer at it, I looked more at what it is I'm doing in first and second year. So, in script writing classes in first and second year, the work that the students do is entirely confined to the page. Now, obviously, there's very good practical reasons for that. It would be impossible to have every student making a film out of every script they write. And it's also very, very important to realise that they have a great deal to learn, not only in the more practical areas, but in my areas as well of screenwriting, before we send them out making films. But nonetheless, after several years of seeing how they respond to this regime of being confined to the page in my module, I started to ask myself two things. Is this way of learning reminding them too much of writing and school and academic sort of work? And if so, is that hindering their creative freedom? And would it be a good thing if the process about learning for writing for screen had some sort of visual component right from the beginning? Now, in speaking with Barry Dignam, who has the same job as me over at the National Film School, he said this. He says this to his film students from the very start. There's no point in writing something if you don't intend to have it filmed or film it yourself. And I found that quite interesting. But here, we're very fortunate because at the moment in third year, the students get a wonderful opportunity to make films that are of a very high professional standard. And everyone is involved in one way or another. Now, the choice of the films that are made is based on the scripts that are written and pitched by the students. Now, will these scripts be more visually literate if, as early as possible, they gain experience in my class of how a script idea, or a character, or a scene might look or sound? So my question then becomes, will my teaching improve, and will their work improve, if I can, one, find a way to convince them that they have interesting stories to tell, and two, find more other simple practical ways in which they can realise those stories that are not confined to the page. In order to help me plan how I might do this, I decided to look at the theory of experiential learning. Now, this theory emphasises learning by doing, and so it seemed the one most likely to be of help to me. Now, here is a quote that I chose for today, but it interested me. It's from Fenwick. The individual constructs new knowledge through experimentation, guided by personal attention, selecting focuses for learning from possibilities presented in the environment, and reflectively analysing these experiments. Now, what's all that about? I see you looking at me. Okay, just to explain. So here, the experimentation might well be a different approach to script writing, and possibilities presented in the environment would suggest that students could use what is immediately around them and easily accessible in thinking about ideas for stories. Jennifer Moon, who was one of my tutors at Bournemouth, and somebody whose work I really admire and has written a lot about learning and development, now she offered very interesting examples to differentiate from experiential learning and what she calls mediated learning. Now, her example of experiential learning is an interested adult visits a museum to view, handle and read from an ancient text. And her example of mediated learning, the student attends a class in which there is a presentation about the text with the teacher quoting from an ancient copy of it. While these two examples aren't perfectly analogous to a screenwriting module, what's clear to me is that my present practice is closer to mediated learning, and my instinct is that the experiential learning example would be better for my students. So I moved on and I looked at this. Now, what's this? This is David Cole's four-stage cyclical theory on experiential learning. Looking at the first stage, he gives us concrete experience. Moving on to the second, observation and reflection. The third, forming abstract concepts. And four, testing in new situations. Now, Cole himself said of the cycle, learning is the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience. Now, just looking at that, just to explain what I think it means to me, is number one, the concrete experience refers to the learner doing, the learner actively experiences an activity. The second stage, observation and reflection, the learner reflects back on that experience. The third, forming abstract concepts, the learner attempts to conceptualize a theory of what is observed. His fourth stage is testing in new situations. And there I see it as the learner now has a theory which will make the next experience more successful. Now, looking at these four stages and translating them into the business of learning script writing, then the concrete experience may be seen as the act of writing a scene or creating a character. However, if all the student does is write the scene down on paper, which is what happens at present, then the second stage, observation and reflection, cannot really happen because the student hasn't truly experienced anything. Instead, the student receives content feedback from me, an analysis, which he or she may take on board depending on their receptivity. But the cycle breaks down because the true experiential element is missing. However, if a way can be found for the student to begin the process of developing a script idea via some genuine concrete experience, then he or she would have something to observe and reflect on, which will in turn will allow the formation of abstract concepts, which hopefully will inform their next script assignment. So then, an important question then becomes, if one wants to use Cope's four-stage cycle, what kind of initial script assignment will constitute a useful concrete experience? And can I find for my students a useful example of Jennifer Moon's interested adult examining the manuscript at the museum? So to pause just for a moment, as I did when I was doing this, and I kind of thought to myself, well, okay, what am I after here? Or what's my philosophy on education? Or why am I doing what I do? And why do I particularly love the subject that I teach? So I suppose I thought, satisfying us all as it would be for me to produce a high stream of high-earning professional writers. The reality of that is that doesn't happen because you're not all interested in screenwriting, and that's absolutely fine. The first point I made to you the first day in the first year is you don't need to be able to write a script brilliantly. You can learn how to do it, but you need to be able to read one and understand it and see whether it's good or bad from the point of view of if you're working within the industry, whether you want to work in a particular project or not. The reality also is that very few graduates from any film course anywhere will go on and earn truckloads of money as writers. However then, I ask myself, should what they're learning therefore have kind of more value beyond the purely professional, either in terms of actually making your own work or personal development? Now, when I was in school this year, I spoke about interviewing Marie Pizzuti, who's the artistic director, and I'm speaking to her about this in terms of, I suppose, the creative side of the short film. And she observed how primary storytelling is. It's fundamental to human nature to define yourself through telling a story, and short film is a format. We are all developing more and more towards visual expression. So in terms of self-expression, I agree with her that film is an exciting way to engage with yourself and the world. And then I looked at two educational philosophers who I really love, Paulo Freire and Jacques Mezirow. And Freire talks about the educator and the role of the educator. Now what the educator does in teaching is to make it possible for the students to be themselves. That was something very important for me, and I suppose I was excited when I read that. And Jacques Mezirow, when he talks about experiential learning and critical self-reflection, he says it's by far the most significant learning experience, reassessing our own orientation to perceiving, knowing, believing, feeling, and acting. So it's important that I make the students believe they have valuable stories to tell, and they should be their starting point. And that's all very well and good as a basis of some sort of philosophical approach. However, I also need to bear in mind that my function as an educator is to educate the students in the theory and the practice of good screenwriting. But such theories themselves are evolving. This book here, Stephen Maris, a film theorist, screenwriting history, theory and practice, he talks about what has been happening and makes the argument for moving away from what has been the dominant focus in screenwriting. He talks about rules for storytelling, proper construction, and norms for writing. He makes the observation that in today's world, because of new technologies, the separation of conception and execution is being challenged in practice, especially from new ways of working linked to digital filmmaking techniques. So, traditionally, a script only became a film after it had been shot and edited. Today there's this concept of pre-visualization, which means that the script, while being developed, is being tested on computers, visualizing scenes before actually shooting it, and then the script changes accordingly. Stephen Maris talks about Mike Leigh's approach to scripting, which was developed in the 70s. He relies heavily on character development through improvisation sessions with actors. Although a script is eventually written, this happens only after the scenes have been worked out. So if you like, Mike Leigh's own pre-visualization is the rehearsal room. Now, I mentioned him earlier, and he was up on my list of people that I'd spoken to. He was at Schull this year at the festival, and I met him, and I was talking to him, but I knew he was working hard for us down there, so I didn't really think shoving a voice recorder under his nose and saying, right, can I talk to you about my masters, would have been the right thing to do because he was really, really busy. But what I did do is I went to a public interview he gave, and I sat up in front and I made some notes. And it was great. But when he was asked what he hoped his legacy would be, this is what he said. What we do may inspire others to do their own thing, their own way. Now, as I understand it, he was clearly encouraging young filmmakers to find ways to think about how they were going to make films, just as he did so radically 40 years ago. Now, it seems to me, in looking at what it is I'm doing in terms of story development and seeing how we can get students writing, that I would look at the involvement of some kind of technology. So, I looked at transmedia storytelling. Why did I do that? With a particular focus of online social media. It's because I see how we live our lives nowadays. It's how I see the students live our lives. Today, what do? We tweet, we blog, we text, we email, we post online, we comment online. And for students, this participation has become a commonplace component of their existence. It's how they tell the stories of their daily lives, their own personal life dramas unfolding. Now, as I was exploring this in terms of narrative, I came across three interesting stories that were told using online social media, and I just want to briefly talk about those now. That would be Barbie and Ken there. I'm sure you recognise all of them. Now, Mattel Incorporated, who's the world's largest toy company and the proud industry parents of Ken and Barbie, launched a media campaign in 2011, which was kind of teasingly called Ken Wants Barbie Back. Because I didn't know all this, apparently. Barbie and Ken had split up in 2004, and Sarah McCann's nodding her head, you know. Who did she hook up with? She hooked up with this surfer dude called Blaine, apparently. Well, that didn't work out. So in January of 2011, Mattel cleverly decided that they wanted Barbie and Ken to get back together. So, with the use of Facebook, Twitter, Foursquare, and YouTube, they use these to reunite the couple by Valentine's Day. And to begin the whole story, it began with Ken creating a profile on the dating website Match.com, only to realise that Barbie was his perfect match. Now, people who got involved in this interacted with Ken as if he was real, and if he was their friend. What I found fascinating about this was the power transfer, because it seemed like the whole of America got involved with the story, and I kept saying to myself, but yes, they're talking about dolls. You know? But it kind of really made a mark with me, and I just want to just read something out here from Lauren Brooks. She's the marketing manager for Barbie, the Barbie brand, and is discussing the use of social media in creating the story. She said, with an absolutely straight face, it allowed us to showcase the realness of the relationship between Barbie and Ken. Being the modern dolls they are, they would have checked out Facebook, browsing through their upcoming Facebook events. The way their reunion came about was not unlike many other modern romances that are often documented and shared via social media channels. Now, naturally, the story had a very happy ending. So that was interesting for me to look at transmedia as a top-down process. So then what I wanted to do was look at it kind of from the bottom up, but kind of from the process where it's driven by the user and the makers. And this is a filmmaker called Lance Voiler. And it's very interesting, having heard Blaine Renwick's talk earlier on about his experience of working in Hollywood. I can't mention the name of the film apparently, or the director, so that's grand. But he talked about, you know, does somebody who wants to work in the film industry work as part of that whole big machine all their life, or do they think, well, actually, no, I want to make films myself, or I want to do this. Now, Lance Voiler was somebody who worked for a long time in Hollywood as something to do with sound. And he was writing scripts and trying to get them made, and it wasn't happening. So he's somebody who I really, really admire because he is passionate about storytelling. He calls himself a story architect. And this film, Head Trauma, was his first major success in 2006. And by 2007, Newsweek had called him one of 18 people who changed Hollywood. So in developing the story and the script of Head Trauma, it began its life as an online graphic novel. Now what that did was it created an audience for what was going to be the film, and it helped shape the tone of the film. Lance claims he knew who his audience were going to be, and that was other independent filmmakers and horror fans. Now, by exciting interest, the novel helped convince people about his vision for the film, so he got people to come and work for him on it. And he then created sites and video channels for content related to the story. So by the time he was actually releasing this film himself, and he booked 17 cinemas all around America, there was already a huge fan base. He says about it himself, transmedia for him, and I just quote here, is focusing on the art of storytelling, how to push the boundaries of traditional filmmaking, allowing audiences to participate and enter the world of the story. There are no rules to it in the digital world. Now, all of this was offering me very kind of interesting food for thought, but it was the final example that kind of grabbed me, and I suppose because I like the man personally, so I'll just show you here. This is a guy called Tim Wright, who describes himself as a writer of digital experiences. He was one of my tutors at Bournemouth. And this particular project that I liked and was of interest to me was created in 2000, so it was kind of back in the early days before, you know, social media had really kicked off, you know, crazy. But the project was called Online Caroline. Now he conceived this with his co-writer Rob Bevan. What he did here was he played with the ideas of online personality, of reality and fiction. Caroline was played by an actress, and she had a website, and she posted daily videos, and players could befriend her and have an online friendship with her via email. Visitors would send and receive emails depending on the relationship with the character. She asked them questions about her lives, what do you think about this? She had a difficult relationship with her boyfriend, and people responded to it. The project was kind of rolled out over 24 days, and what it did at the time was it moved a story being told to an audience. The story became about the relationship between the reader and Caroline. The audience no longer listened or viewed, and Wright said of the process itself is that, you know, this gives us all a chance to have our say, and the writer has the opportunity to listen, collaborate, and manage. So at this stage I was saying to myself, okay, you know, people once told stories to one another, then they wrote them down, then they listened to them on radio, then they went to films to watch stories unfold, and then we all sat in our living rooms at home and watched TV and saw stories that way. Nowadays, anyone can view or listen or read or participate. They can do it on the move. They don't need the whole story in one setting. The way in which people are willing to receive stories is different. both Tim Wright and Lance Voiler have spotted this and have developed this new model. Now, my purpose is not to create a multi-million-dollar movie experience or to create an interactive website about someone called Caroline. Well, she knows something I like to. But I want to create a concrete experience for students in their screenwriting learning. The methods Voiler and Wright employed clearly offer possibilities for story creation to move beyond the page. But I had to ask myself then, what was my model? And again here, I just want to use two quotes that again I kind of referred to when I was thinking about this. One is from Barry Dignam, the screenwriting lecturer. He says, I think it's pretty critical. You can go to a million different script classes and be taught the ingredients of how to write a film, but unless you're actually going to bring something that's personal or your own personal view of the world to it, it's bland. And then this Mexican filmmaker who had a couple of films at school this year, when I talked to him, he said, a lot of my friends told me, you know, you capture what you're living at the time. Okay, what am I at here? In first year, this is what I think I'd like to do. I want the students, in terms of form, structure, and learning the rudimentary elements of script formatting, that to stay the same, obviously. But I want them to start as writers, to start to think visually. So, I've come up with this idea that I want them to keep a writer's notebook. Now, this is no longer a notebook in the old traditional sense. It's a writer's notebook in the form of a blog, fair enough, not very many sort of mad rules there, but I want this to be specifically for their screenwriting module. And I want to assign them specific tasks that will have a visual component and a story component. Now, what do I mean by that? One example of this kind of work I want to do is this idea of place. I'll ask them to think about a place they really like. I want them to photograph that place. They can use their camera phones. They can even film it with their phones as well if they like. But I want to see it visually. Then, in their post, I want them to talk about why they like the place, why it's important to them. But I'll also ask them to consider what sort of scene or story might happen in such a place. They'll consider what it actually means to them because of their own memories and their experience, and what it actually looks like to someone else who just sees an image of it. The student will already have started the process of seeing a potential of telling stories in what is already familiar to them. Interestingly enough, Eddie Devlin?
Yep.
Remember we were talking about an idea today?
True.
We talked about Black Rock.
Okay.
You want to shoot your film there. Why? Because you're making a film with Alvaro.
Yeah.
And you said, you see, Alvaro's just come here on his Erasmus, and he went to Black Rock, and he saw it differently. As to how you had seen it, because you knew it, and now because of how he's seen it, as a potential for telling a story, you're looking at it differently. So I was really delighted to hear that today. Okay, good. Now there'll be a series of these exercises, and students will be encouraged to view each other's blogs and comment on them, offering their own thoughts on the visual images and the stories they might tell. Now, this would be quite serious work. It would be assessed and marked on the basis of a serious level of engagement on their part, not only with the work that they do themselves, but the work that they do with other students in looking and commenting and observing their other blogs. Now, with this in mind, at the end of first year, what I would do is I would hope to have firmly established the link between telling stories and exploring the world around them. In second year, as it currently stands, the students already engage more with fiction in my module by learning about character and story development. So in this new approach, what I would like the second year students to do would be focus on the same thing of character and story development, but to bring the experience they have gained on working on their personal projects into the sphere of fiction. Now what I want them to do then is, I want them to create a character. And I want them to write a fictional character, but to write using social media. That is, that the character has a Twitter account, say, and a blog. I want them to cast an actor to play this character, and I want them to film him or her in their own world. We could consider, if we're talking about this further down the line, maybe looking at students from the Performance Studies course here at UKIT and setting that up. The plan is the character will tweet and blog and make video diaries using whatever is available to them. Just a phone would be what I would think would be the best thing. Through this, This is what I see the student is learning. Character development, excuse me, how the character interacts and behaves. Dialogue, how the character speaks. Story, beginning to consider what sort of story this character might be part of. Is there drama, interest, and potential for further development with this character in script form? Now, as the exercise is inspired by Cole's four-stage cyclical theory of learning, the students will be asked to write a short character biography. Now, you're all familiar with doing that, right? Now, that's their starting point. But the concrete experience will then be the process of casting an actor, working with him or her on the role, shooting simple video diaries, and writing blogs and tweets of the character. The difference between the student's initial notion of the character on paper and the reality of the finished exercise should form the basis for their observation and reflection. Now, because this new way of working is experiential and new, I thought it would be useful to create a template for myself to see exactly if the theory worked. And if we did go on and develop this on the course, then I'd already have something in place which would be a template for what I might be asking them to do. So I created this character at the start when I was giving you the list of all the people that I had spoken to and worked with. The actor is an actor called Dan Colley. So I created this character called Cam Slime, and there he was on Twitter, and he has a blog and some videos on YouTube as well. Now, it's very important to remember, the specific character and story here is of no importance whatsoever, other than as an illustration to the students, how they might set about developing their own idea. But I imposed certain constraints on myself for this particular project. So this is what I said to myself. I said, okay, the character should be around the same age as the student I teach. I must film using equipment that I either have or can borrow. That was an iPhone. I must use only locations and settings I have easy access to, getting back to that sense of place. And I can get help, but only if it's for free. Okay. So, what was my starting point? Where was my Black Rock? Where was that? It was this friend's house in Sutton. Why did I choose it? Because it's this big room, and when I was there one night, I was outside looking in, and they have a huge, huge glass extension, and I just thought it looked really good, really visual. No, I didn't actually film anything like that. We were only using the phone, it's only character stuff. But that was my starting point. I moved away from who lived there, which is my friend and his wife and their 4 daughters, and I came up with this character because I thought, well, who would live there? So I came up with this idea for a character who's a young guy in his early 20s. I knew Dan, the actor you've just seen the photograph of, but I didn't know him very well. But I emailed him and I asked him to get involved. Now, it was actually very simple. I wrote a scene. I wrote a scene of this character on his own, having a night in, and he's filming himself. That was all. We went to the location, and what we did was we worked on it while we were there. So we developed the scene, and what I'd like to do now, if you'll bear with me, can I just show you a couple of those? Okay. Because this is what we shot. I'll give you, there's a load of this stuff that we did. This is his night in, okay?
Callum Slimy here in Shea Slimy. My parents actually my house. Oh, not actually my house for time because I'm going to Paris, and so I can actually stay there out loud because I'm home alone. Folks are away, and my sister is in the grave. So this is a painting which I really like. My mum has really told us abstract painting shit, all the squiggly lines and stuff. I don't really understand it, but I do like it. Don't know why. And it's also painted by this guy who is a friend of my mum's from college, and he's really good at it. I've been here a few times. This is where I'm going to be spending my evening. Callum's night in. So, as you know, I'm a bit of a health freak. I have my 8K to do every day, and 6 days a week I'd be really into the sort of high protein, low carb diet stuff. So your turkey breast, your avocado, really trying to get that energy. But one night a week, I have a bit of a cheat day. I eat all the stuff which makes me happy. So like wine gums, which I'm favourite there, or chocolate and Posh crisps, because I'm posh. And wine, the most important ingredient. It says eat now and carry on. And this is the MacBook. Excuse me. Where I will be watching Geordie Shore and laughing at those looking at these. Here is the dining table. That is where we have the food. And Mom and Dad would be pretty good at the parties and that. So we'd have all the aunties and uncles over for Christmas. And Granddad wouldn't be too shy with the old vino there again. So this one time I got up to go out the back and I didn't know this wasn't open, and so I put a bang into it. And it was absolutely hilarious. They were all laughing at me, and they called me Quasimodo for about 6 weeks because I had this big old lump on my head, which I didn't exactly appreciate. Anyway, here is the kitchen. Mum does most of the cooking, but also I'm into the food as well, so I do some of the cooking. This is the island, called Mum's Island. Her own island, private island. And yeah, it's actually class. It's a class kitchen. I would be lucky in Paris to get an apartment which is the size of this island. Anyway, don't know what else to say really. I'm going to be locked later, so I'll probably make another one of these. You can see kind of a bit of before and after, but fuck it, look, I deserve it because I've been hitting all my goals this week, so I'm pretty proud and deserve a bit of a night in, you know? So probably one of my last nights in Shea Summit. See you later.
Okay. Lights here. Okay, now, that was just about 3.5 minutes long. Most of them are actually quite shorter than that. But when I compared the scene I initially wrote with the version we shot, it was clear to me that there was a much greater sense of who the character was. Obviously, what he sounded, what he looked like, and where he lived. As there would have been had I gone through the old process of developing it all on paper. I would have been writing, making notes, rewriting, and the effort and time probably wouldn't have made any difference. So, and I definitely say like the buzz I got from doing this was much more exciting and interesting. So I went on and developed other stuff. Again, used blogs. What was interesting for me as well, with, you know, I'm not a photographer, but I went and took photographs of where he was from and that. And I suppose there's another one I want to show you here now, which is the character where he comes from, the both. And that, this is just about a minute long, but I suppose having seen the character in his home, what I was interested in seeing was him kind of in his water, what am I saying? I was interested in seeing him in his wider environment of where he comes from and what his attitude towards that place was. So, again, I wrote the scene, we went out and we shot.
Hey, Callum here. I'm in Hutt, my hometown. And I'm on the middle here. This is where all the tourists and the day trippers come and they get their bag of chips and they look at the seagull and they go, oh, lovely seagull. And they look at the rich people and they go, oh, lovely rich person. Oh, I'm trying one of those. And then they get on the dart and they go home when they die. Up there's my house. My dad used to bring me here a lot back in the day to the yacht club, which is just behind us. And as a teenager, me and my friends used to come and, well, drink a lot. Here in the building. Now I come just to be on my own, to be honest. You know, I don't know the, Colin, how are things, man? Or, you well? And I don't know, I just want to be fake. Anyway. I was born here, but I shall not die here. I shall die like old Oscar Wilde in Paris. That'll be fun.
Okay. Now, just get out of there actually. Oh, help with the lights. Okay. Thanks very much. Star. Okay, so there's just two examples of it. Now, we continued this way in developing the character, and in a day and a half, we shot 6 of these little videos. And I think then what I used there was, I also recorded a podcast, and then I used these as the basis of 10 blog posts, and I had, I think, about 30 things on Twitter. I know Caroline followed me, Annie Stafford followed me, followed the character, just over that short period of time. So for those of you who'd like to take a closer look, that's him on WordPress there. So the best thing, if you want to look at the story I came up with, you can just go to his blog. There's only one archive, that's July. Go to it and work your way up through it. And as I say, the character of the story is of no interest, but as a process of learning about writing, it was fantastic to have written the stuff and then go and work on it, and then find that you had a better, more developed sense of the character and sense of the scene that you were writing. Now, having been through all this myself, I'm pretty sure that any of my second year students could do this. And from my point of view, I'm convinced that they would have a better sense of what they were trying to create if they were able to view material like this. And if I were able to view it, I too would have a better sense of what they were trying to create. And they would have the concrete experience of being with the character in the place where the character comes from. So, this whole kind of testing new situations, which is Cole's fourth part of the cycle, would mean that the students' deeper understanding of the character, who started life as a paragraph on a page, will now result in a better written screenplay. And one thing is certain, that the student will have had an experience closer to that of Jennifer Moon's interested adult examining the manuscript of the museum. But instead of sitting in class, taking notes on what's good and bad about their written work, they will have written something, cast an actor, found locations, and shot mini scenes using whatever they have on them, the phone. And I think writing and working this way will help the writing and the work develop organically along the way. Now, I'm aware that this stimulus for the future and this desire for change as yet offers no guaranteed results. But from my own experience of it, of trying it out, I'm convinced that the process itself will yield substantial benefits for our students. Experiential learning, proper reflection, and core issues of self-belief and confidence that there are stories around them and within them. I also believe that when in third year, as writers, they have to face the challenge of writing a script that's worth making into a proper short film, they will be better prepared for it. So, I believe in the power of creative writing, both from a pedagogical and a sociological viewpoint. Studying and learning the possibilities of how to express yourself for a potential screen image is a force that I believe greatly in. And in looking at developing and improving how it is I do it here in DKIT with all of your help is something that makes me very happy and very excited. So thank you all very much. So if you think what I presented here today is something that you would like to have had explored yourselves while studying in first and second year with me, very technologically orientated, this is a little pom-pom here. Just place it in the glass. If you don't, you walk out that door, you don't have to place the glass at all. Okay? So, thanks very much. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 19, 20. Okay, next week.